Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tottenham Way. I'm Tom Barclay of The Sun. I'm joined by George Sessions of PA and Tom Allnutt of The Times. Before we get into the weeds about Eberechi Eze and what happened there, and just before we start the podcast, just wanted to say a massive thank you for all the support and all the positive feedback over the summer. When our episodes on Ange Postecoglou leaving and Thomas Frank arriving got record numbers for listens. If you do have time to leave us a review or like us on Spotify or Apple, it would make a massive difference to us, guys. And this season we are expanding. So you can now also follow us on Instagram, on YouTube, as well as X. Just search for the @the-Tottenham Way handle. You can also email us any questions, comments, suggestions, maybe even lucrative advertising opportunities to the Tottenham Way pod @gmail.com. That's the Tottenham Way pod @gmail.com. This season, we'll be bringing you pods every week and after every game from the reporters who are at the matches, myself, George, Tom, and also Marcus, talking to the players and who have the inside track at the club. Now, back to the podcast. Right, guys, I want to start off with a quote from Ange Postecoglou, actually, a famous one from last season when he was talking about injuries, and it seems quite fitting. I've seen it used on social media quite a lot. He talks about how every time feels like he sees a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, it turns out to be an oncoming train. I feel like there's a reason that meme is being shared quite a lot amongst the Spurs fan base, and it is because they keep missing out on targets, the latest Eberechi Eze. Rather than me do a rundown, maybe George, you can get us up to speed with what on earth happened with Eze.
Yeah, it's been a bad 24 hours, I think, to be a Spurs fan. If anyone has been living under a rock, Eberechi Eze is going to be joining Arsenal to make it even more painful. I guess to kind of go back to the start, we understand talks started with Crystal Palace over Eze on, over a week ago now, Tuesday, August the 12th. And it seemed like everything was progressing. There was kind of a feeling he wouldn't play in Crystal Palace's opener against Chelsea on Sunday, August 17th. And the fact he did, I guess, was a worry, but it still sounded like everything was heading in the right direction. And Spurs actually agreed a deal with Crystal Palace, we're told, on Wednesday, August 20th. 60 million up front, 7.5 in add-ons, and Arsenal have swooped in, offered the same amount, and now he's going to be heading to Arsenal. He's got his own kind of connection with Arsenal. He grew up as an Arsenal fan, was in their academy. And, if we're being totally honest, even as a Spurs fan, if you're given the choice of Arsenal, a team that's finished second the last 3 or 4 years, or Tottenham, a team that's won the Europa League, but obviously been very up and down the last few years, you are going to probably go in the red side. I guess from a Spurs point of view, it's just a huge missed opportunity. And, clearly the club feel like they've done everything they can. They've done everything right. The negotiations were progressing. But there is various points, I think, when you can say, Eze had a release clause that expired last Friday. Could Tottenham have just, activated the release clause, made him their player by Saturday? He wouldn't have even featured in that Chelsea game. That's got kind of one big window that they could have gone for. And I guess the other one is, they could have gone for Eze earlier this summer. We know Thomas Frank wanted 2 number 10s, not 0 number 10s as he's got now, because Spurs, really tried to sign Morgan Gibbs-White back in July. So, it feels like there was definitely opportunities for Spurs to get this deal wrapped up and to get it done. And there's going to be a huge amount of frustration now, amongst the whole fan base, because, really and truly, Eberechi Eze should be a Spurs player by now. And it's going to be so much more, rubbing salt into the wounds to see him in the red of Arsenal.
What about you, Tom? Do you have any sympathy for the club in this situation?
I mean, I think it's possible to have sympathy with how it panned out in the end. If you think about how, the Havertz injury obviously happened, and if that hadn't happened, then Arsenal wouldn't have come in. Equally, Spurs, understandably, probably say, that they had the deal sort of finalised, and it was Crystal Palace who wanted to not complete it at the end because they wanted him to play in the Conference League match. So they would say, well, it wasn't our fault that it wasn't, completely done. But I think they left themselves vulnerable. That's the thing. They left themselves vulnerable to these things. And I think you can look at it either way. Maybe Spurs would say, well, we were a bit unlucky at the end, but I would look at it from the other angle and say, how lucky were Tottenham to basically have a free run at Eze for the best part of a summer transfer window. We know that Bayern were keen on Eze, at one point. We know Arsenal have been keen. We know Man City have been massively keen on Eze for a long time. I wouldn't have been surprised if Chelsea or Manchester United had come in. I was, completely surprised that Spurs had what looked like a free run for the best part of 3 or 4 weeks, to get one of the best, most talented England midfielders proven in the Premier League. That's almost unheard of. And to be honest, at a price which, okay, it's not cheap, but 60 million, I don't think it was, completely out of the water, for a player of his ability. And I think when you have that kind of opportunity, and you think about the timeline here, and you can go back as far as you want. Maddison was injured 17 days ago, 18 today, to be honest, and Kai Havertz was injured yesterday afternoon, and Arsenal managed to swing this round in a few hours, whereas Tottenham were taking weeks, still fiddling around with the numbers and the fee, and we know that this deal was complicated. It's been really complicated all the way through. So it's not to say it was an easy deal to do, and I think, of course, Arsenal knew what the fee had been agreed with Spurs. So it's much easier to come in almost as the second-hand club and to match something than it is to agree something in the first place. But still, that Maddison, 2.5 weeks they've had to fix that problem. They haven't managed it. How long ago was it that Gibbs White signed his new contract with Nottingham Forest? How long ago was it that we knew that Kulusevski wouldn't be here for the start of the season? I mean, George says that Spurs were interested in Eze, earlier in the summer. They were interested in Eze last year, and there's an argument to say they should have signed him for Ange Postecoglou, in year 1 or year 2 at the very least, so I really don't think that the argument we needed a bit more time, really doesn't carry any weight in this scenario. And the bottom line is, and I think this is what the fans' frustration comes from, because listen, Eze is a great player, but there are other good players, and there's a reason why, Eze is going to be a really fantastic signing for Arsenal. Is it the absolute be all and end all? In my opinion, no. There are other players you can get. I don't think, Spurs are going to live or die by whether or not they sign Eze. The problem here, I think, and the reason for the fans' frustration is because this is symptomatic of something that they've seen so many times before. You can go back over the history of transfer windows and the players Spurs have missed out on to other clubs in these very scenarios. Willian, Luis Diaz, Dybala, like whoever you want, really, going right back over the decades almost. And there's always this sense that it comes down to a lack of ruthlessness, a lack of decisiveness, a lack of ambition, to be honest. It comes down to that thing where it's like we're fiddling around with 1, 2, 3, 4 million. Whereas the big clubs in these scenarios, they pay the money that's required to get it done. When Man City needed a midfielder in January, they pay the money for Nico Gonzalez. When Arsenal need to replace someone like Havertz, they do it in an afternoon. And sometimes you have to overpay. Look at what Liverpool paid for Florian Wirtz. Sometimes you have to overpay a little bit to get the deal done, to get the player in the door, and everyone moves on, and it's worth it in the end. The problem with Spurs is they're cautious, they're hesitant in these moments, and that leaves them so vulnerable to these things happening. So is it the be all and end all? Let's see. Who knows what's going to happen next, but I can understand why the fans are fuming this morning.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, the particular reasons for the frustration. And he wanted to come to Tottenham. I mean, he wanted to come to Arsenal more, or he wants to come to Arsenal more, but there was an opportunity there, wasn't there? And it'd be interesting to hear Cristian Romero's thoughts. He's obviously, we'll come on to him in a bit, some good news surrounding him, but obviously he's publicly called out, let's be honest, the club's direction last season over signing players, and this is a big miss. I mean, he just felt so perfect for what Spurs need right now. Personally, I thought in so many different ways, and where he is and where he is in his career, it felt perfect time to from a motivational point of view to make that step up into Champions League football for Tottenham. And let's be honest, one of the biggest disappointments here is because they've lost him to their arch rivals. It must be really, really painful. It's an interesting one from the players' perspective, choosing Arsenal. I mean, on the face of it, it makes complete sense because even though Tottenham won a trophy more recently, Arsenal are still way ahead of them, really. Let's be honest. In the last few years, they've come second 3 years in a row. Yes, the pressure is on Arteta to deliver now this season, but Spurs finished 17th. There's a big difference, really, and they look in a position where they can really challenge for the Premier League title. He obviously was a follower of Arsenal as a kid. He was at the club when he was younger, and yet I look at Spurs, and they're obviously in the Champions League, and I look at a year where Eze is going to hope to go to the World Cup next year, and he just would have been guaranteed game time at Spurs. I don't know if that's quite the case at Arsenal. He'll go into a bit of a squad situation. I mean, does he start for them? We'll wait to see, really. I mean, George, I suppose maybe it's irrelevant now, people sort of talking about where he'll fit in for Arsenal, but just on that decision to pick Arsenal over Spurs effectively, is there an argument to be had that it's maybe not the best choice for him going into a World Cup year?
You could say that, but then, Tom just mentioned about, Spurs lacking ambition by not getting this deal done. I mean, Eze is showing ambition by backing himself to go to Arsenal and go in their team. I look at it with that Spurs lens, and, this summer window, we spoke about it a couple of weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, it wasn't a great window. It could have been a great window if Spurs had got Eze over the line, and perhaps if they could have got Savinho over the line. We understand they are still interested in Savinho, and he's still a target, but it just kind of puts the focus back on Daniel Levy again, and back on the squad, and back on this summer window. And now we're in a position where, Man United have spent over 200 million, Chelsea have spent over 200 million, Liverpool have. Arsenal have now, although will be. All Spurs' rivals have spent big money this summer. And, you can factor in Kevin Danso, Matthias Tel joining this summer. But let's be totally honest, Spurs have signed João Paulinho on loan. Very good signing, but it is a loan. Mohamed Kudus looks a very good signing, 55 million. Takai's come in, but he's not, in my view, going to be ready to play significant minutes for the first team. At the minute, Spurs' squad has been improved by 2 players. And yet they've lost James Maddison now for the season. Sonny's left. The squad is in a worse shape now than it was under Ange Postecoglou last season, when they finished 17th and they could only prioritise one competition. And it's hugely embarrassing for the club to have this fallout so quickly after the Morgan Gibbs-White fallout. And they've got to act now. They've got 10 days, and they've got to find a number 10. And they need to kind of give the fan base something, because there was a protest before the game on Saturday against Burnley. It was a very small crowd, nowhere near the numbers that the previous change for Tottenham protests gathered. But I think there was a feeling that protest was a bit premature, because Spurs are about to sign Eze. They're potentially going to sign Savinho. This could be one of their best windows ever. Well, if there's the next protest, if there's not going to be any activity over the next 10 days, that could be a lot more well attended now, and those kind of fans that think there is an issue and want change at the club, they're going to point to this as a reason for it. So it's a huge 10 days now for Tottenham, and Thomas Frank needs the support as well. He can't go into the season with this squad and be expected to compete on 4 fronts.
It also just seems to me that throughout the summer, Spurs have been wary about this Eze deal for a long time. They've been sort of nervous about it for various reasons. The clause, but also I think they knew that Arsenal were keen earlier in the summer in the window. They knew that they were exploring that deal when Arsenal were kind of looking at their options, and Eze was very much one of them. And then Nwaneri sort of signed his new contract. Arsenal was sort of briefing, basically they weren't going to spend any big money on big signings until they made sales. And there's sort of a cluster of Arsenal players they sort of need to get through the exit door before they could spend any more money. And so I think Spurs probably thought they had that kind of window where actually Arsenal was sort of out of the picture, weren't interested. But somehow they kind of walked back into that sort of nightmare, PR scenario they were so desperate to avoid it. It's why I'm surprised in a way that they, having gone in for him, why didn't they sense that opportunity in that window? Why didn't they realise that at any moment, once the season started, a player can get injured in a different club? And not just a player could get injured, but what happens if Arsenal had drawn 0-0 at Manchester United at the weekend? And everyone was talking about how Arsenal aren't creating enough chances, how they haven't got that unpredictability and creativity that they need. It's very possible that Arsenal would have suddenly thought, actually, we do need to spend some more money on a creative midfielder. What happens if City had drawn 0-0 away at Wolves? Maybe they would have thought we need some more energy in there. What happens if Phil Foden had, pulled his hamstring? There are loads of scenarios that could have happened to any of the big six clubs in the first 1 or 2 weeks of the window, and let's say it could have been 2 or 3 going to the end of the window, where any of those teams might have thought, actually, Eze, 60 million, ready to go, proven, English midfielder, any of those guys could have turned to Eze. So I don't know why Spurs didn't sense their opportunity to go for it and to get it done. I think there's a thing here where there's a gap between what maybe Daniel Levy thinks the fans expect. The fans, I don't think, expect Spurs to be spending 120 million on Florian Wirtz. They don't expect them to be challenging Real Madrid and Barcelona for the best players in the world. But when there is an opportunity and there is a signing there for them, right in front of them, and we're talking about, whether or not the payments get paid in 3 or 4 installments, or whether or not it's 2 or 3 million here or there, that's what really pisses the fans off. When it's a matter of those small margins to get something over the line, and Spurs don't manage to do it. And the thing is, I think as well, is it's not just the Arsenal thing; it's the Gibbs-White thing, isn't it? Like it's the two of these happening in the same window. If it was one of them, and I sort of think people maybe gave Spurs a pass on Gibbs-White almost. I don't know. I can't speak for all the fans, but it seemed to me that they were a bit like, okay, this can happen. A player can be, swayed back in by a let's call him charismatic owner like Marinakis. That sometimes deals go awry, but for two of these deals to go awry in the same window, with the greatest of respect, clubs Nottingham Forest and Crystal Palace, who are teams that Spurs should be able to buy from. These are not teams. We're not talking about rival clubs here. It's not Chelsea. It's not Arsenal. Not even West Ham. That these are clubs that Spurs should be able to buy from in the Premier League. And two really good targets, they failed on in the same window. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think the more you think about it, the more it does feel like a bit of a fumble. Also, because when you look at the wages that Spurs generally spend on players, a lot of like the really, really big name top talent who are in the prime of their career do seem a bit out of reach a lot of the time, I think. I mean, so for example, Bryan Mbeumo, I'm not sure. Obviously, I don't know exactly what he's on at Man United, but I'm led to believe he's on, significant wages that were probably what Spurs weren't going to pay. But Eze felt like it was a doable deal. So, and there aren't that many of those around at that sort of ready sort of level of his standing in the game and where he's at. So, yeah, a big miss for all the points you've just made. Let's move it on. George has already pointed out, massive 10 days left. They've got to do something. Let's talk a bit about Savinho, because it does seem like he's still a target. There's reports from Brazil, I think, that they're preparing a sort of record bid for him. I mean, Tom, what do you think of Savinho? Because he's obviously a really talented player and he can play in different positions. But to my mind, he seems more of a winger, which they could do with. But number 10 is really where they need a new signing. Can he fit the bill there, or is it him and another one if they manage to get him done? What do you think?
I mean, it seems like I've always thought it seems like a lot of money for Savinho. Like the numbers that City are wanting, was it somewhere 80 million euros, so 67 million, almost 70 million pounds. Feels like a lot, for what he has done in the Premier League and where he's at his point in his career. We're not talking about a proven player who's shown it over 2 or 3 years in the Premier League or even at the top, at the highest level. He had a really good season for Girona in La Liga, playing off the left. And he can play off the right as well, so he has that versatility. I think he's an exciting player with huge potential. And you talk to City fans and talk to City people, I think people generally think that he is someone who's got a great future. I mean, look at what Guardiola says about him. City don't want to sell him, which I think speaks volumes. Given the options they have. But I agree with you. I'm slightly doubtful about the numbers and whether or not it's kind of the profile that Spurs need. Spurs already have a collection of kind of wingers with lots of upside, where they're kind of waiting for one or two of them to sort of explode and to turn into something that's really established and a high class sort of front three forward in the Premier League. They've already got a few of those. So I'm wondering why really they're so focusing on another one, if you like. The other part of this is, in terms of the reaction to what they do now in the last 10 days, I think there's sort of two options. One, they could they have to switch. They could switch focus basically and go for another sort of number 10. Whether it's Morgan Rogers or Nico Paz, or and they could try and spend a lot of money on them. I think what they have to be careful not to do now, and I don't think they will because it's not really in Daniel Levy's makeup, but they have to be careful not to sort of double the mistake, by almost kind of trying to rectify it, signing someone who they're not really convinced by for big money. And then next year we say, why on earth did they spend 55 million on this kid, who, from somewhere who, he's a 19-year-old or something, because they wanted to almost fill a gap and to please the supporters almost and give Frank something. If you look at how Liverpool, acted last summer, where they sort of said, okay, there isn't quite the right player in the market. We have to adjust the team a little bit. And maybe we wait for another year or another window to get someone we really want. I know that's probably not what the fans want to hear. But actually, maybe they make the team more solid. They make the midfield more solid. Frank says, okay, we go with a solid midfield three. And if we can, we sign another winger, we sign another forward, and we make the front three more exciting and more creative. But actually, we kind of have what we have in the middle, and we go with that, rather than signing another number 10 that we don't think is actually going to do anything,
Tom, I get that argument, but Liverpool, it's just not a comparable situation, is it? I mean, they had an unbelievable team already, which they're just making ridiculously better. Spurs, we all saw from pre-season that creativity or lack of it is going to be a problem this season. I know they beat Burnley comfortably, but they really, I think it will soon show itself if they don't get someone who's able to unlock defences with some killer passes soon.
But number 10,
when the fixtures start to really.
But number 10 is not a position in the market where you can just sort of have a go in the last week and find something easily. With all respect, it's not the kind of position that really favours the kind of market opportunity strategy when it comes to a transfer window. Maybe fullbacks, maybe even strikers, wingers for sure. But number 10s are difficult to find, especially the best ones, the ones that can really improve teams like Spurs. It's not easy to go and find them. They're the kind of positions that you kind of scout for 2 or 3 years and you watch someone and you really make sure that they're good. I wouldn't want to be Johan Lange at this moment looking for a number 10 with a week to go under pressure, and he might, maybe Spurs have got a couple of other targets. Morgan Rogers, by the way, would be fantastic. Maybe they have got other ones who they are convinced by. What I'm saying is if they're not convinced by somebody, then don't go and spend 60 million on them, because wait for a window. You have to take the heat. You have to take the fact that you haven't got Gibbs White and Eze. That's fine. Take the heat, and maybe in January or more likely next summer you go again. And I take the point like Liverpool, of course, like better team overall, absolutely. But tactically, if you look at that midfield that Liverpool had last year, they were also lacking a little bit of creativity. They actually have the last couple of years, to be honest. But they've got a good enough front three that it kind of makes it work. And if you haven't got the players, you haven't got the players. And you've got to adjust the system and adjust the team that you have. And Frank is good at that. That's the one thing Spurs have got with Frank, is he will adjust to what he has. I just wonder maybe if that will be the better solution going forward. What do you think, George?
Can anyone see a world where they now go in for Leicester's Bilal El-Khanous, who's very close to signing for Palace? It's obviously Spurs were kind of linked to him at the start of the summer. I think he had a 25 million release clause. I don't think, he's not on Eze's level, nowhere near, but you just wonder as kind of an opportunity, a younger playmaker. What is he, 21, I think? It would sort of, it would be payback to beat Palace to that signing. I kind of wonder if Spurs might go down that route. Just as kind of a side note, this season on the Tottenham Way pod, we want to kind of get the fans' views in a bit more. We did have some reaction to some tweets we put out last night, and this one sort of, Fuzzy Dunlop 14, a month since Morgan Gibbs White fell through, could have just paid the money. I think that's kind of a sentiment shared by plenty of others, and this one as well, probably similar. Daniel J. Perman start by giving City every penny they've asked for Savinho. I mean, I think Savinho, I completely agree with what Tom is saying about, he's not a number 10. Where does he fit in? I just think he's probably the big wow factor that is left out there. And I think Spurs are now going to have to go, hell for leather to get that deal. And the complication is they're playing Man City this weekend. So, very, very highly doubt anything's going to happen over the next couple of days, even though Savinho is injured. But I just think they're going to have to go all out to bring in a big name now. They're going into the Champions League. That they need something to kind of bring a wow factor. Savinho is very young, but then everyone you talk to says he's going to be an absolute star. And his his numbers last season, he didn't score many goals, but I think it was 14 assists in the Premier League. And I guess Thomas Frank does traditionally like attackers that just can all, dovetail between different positions. And I guess a front three of when you've got a Kudos, you've got Brennan Johnson against one side, Savinho in the middle, that all kind of mixing around each other. It could work. I don't think he's necessarily going to be a number 10 option, but I do wonder if that's going to be the direction of travel that Spurs now head in. And they've got to do something, haven't they? This squad's definitely going to need a big boost in terms of attacking reinforcements.
Sure. Nice little reference there to the my favourite show, The Wire, Fuzzy Dunlop. If you haven't seen it, you won't know what I'm talking about, but I'm sure whoever made that their handle will know what I'm talking about. I wonder about players like Tyler Dibbling, whether something like that might happen. Not that, he's obviously a very exciting young player, but that's just often where Tottenham seem to revert to if as part of their general model, isn't it, for younger players? But let's see. Let's move on to some positive news, because it's obviously been a really frustrating period the last 24 hours. But before then, it was looking quite rosy, wasn't it, with Cristian Romero signing a new contract, which in itself is a pretty stunning turnaround. He last season had appeared to be agitating for a move, or at least dropping hints that he would be interested in a move to La Liga when he did that interview back in April, when he said he'd love to play in La Liga at some point, amid interest from Atletico Madrid. Let's be honest, if Atletico Madrid had stumped up a fee that Spurs would have deemed acceptable, and it was never clear exactly what they would have accepted, whether it had been 60 million or more, then I would not be surprised if he were playing in red and white now over in Spain. But it didn't happen. To be fair to him, he very quickly seemed to embrace Thomas Frank, despite being very close to Ange Postecoglou. I mean, remember, Romero is very sort of specific with his messaging and the points he makes. I mean, when all the players were doing their social media posts thanking Ange Postecoglou, Romero waited literally for Frank to be appointed to drop his one. It felt, to be honest, the timing felt intentional, put it that way. And it felt like whether he would still be here, there was a reason why there were a lot of questions about Romero in Frank's first press conference. But things have changed, and he has not only been main captain, he seems really committed and has signed a new contract until 2029. And that was always the case, wasn't it, with Romero, whether to keep him or not. It was never about his quality. And if he was committed, then 100% you keep him. I suppose there's a question mark about his injury record, but if he can improve on that, then he's obviously a World Cup winner who lifts all the other players' standards by the way he plays the game. He's fantastic. He was an absolutely massive influence in winning the Europa League last season when he recovered from injury. I understand him to be like a really big presence in the dressing room. And all round, this is really positive. Tom, Cristian Romero, I mean, did you see this turn of events happening even a couple of months ago?
I thought he'd leave this summer, to be honest. I thought Spurs would sell him. But I guess maybe underestimated that kind of gap in financial power. I think what Spurs would have even considered for Romero, I think, was well beyond what Atletico Madrid were prepared or willing or could even, pay. And I think it's true. Like I think Romero said it. He said he would love to play in La Liga one day. He said he would be up for a sort of a new challenge, and I think we can't kid ourselves about that. I think if the opportunity had been there, maybe he would have gone. But we are where we are, and I think Frank has done really well to turn this around. And I think it's a really early boost, and it's why, not to come back to the Eze thing, it's why that it kind of sticks in the mouth, that because everything else has been so positive so far. The draw with PSG, really good performance, brilliant first win against Burnley, clean sheet. Romero signing a new deal, everything is kind of going in the right direction. Okay, a couple of injuries, of course, but generally I think it's been a really positive start for Frank. So it's just a shame that the club haven't really been able to kind of match that sort of energy and optimism. But I think he's, brilliant to get Romero on side straight away. I slightly had my doubts about the pick, because I just think from what we've seen from Romero in terms of his consistency, in terms of his performance, but also, in terms of his rhetoric, off the pitch as well. I wondered if it was going to be a sort of a kind of classic Frank choice when you think about how he had Norgard at Brentford, who's sort of, the real club stalwart sort of type personality. Romero is a different type of captain, isn't he? And I don't pretend to know him personally and what he's like in the dressing room. But, he's very popular. He's funny. He's kind of like, he's cool. He speaks different languages. He's not necessarily the loudest, but he's kind of like, I think he's sort of friends with everyone. Everyone really respects him. And clearly the way he plays on the pitch is a big part of it. His aggression, his tenacity. I think he's a sort of warrior leader, right? That everyone sort of wants to follow when he's at his best. The question is, and I think Frank is slightly kind of putting his eggs in this basket, that the armband will bring the best out of Romero as well. It's not just about Romero bringing the best out of the team. It's about, there's something here that I think Frank wants to get out of Romero as well. And I can't remember if it was me or one of you guys who asked the other day in the press conference, and said, are you hoping it brings more consistency out of him because his performances have been a bit up and down? And Frank sort of pretended not to know about that. He can, I've been outside the club. I didn't know his performances have been up and down. Everyone knows Romero's performances have been up and down. And I think he will hope that being a captain will mean that he focuses more, even in the smaller games. Because we know, you're absolutely right, Tom, we know what his ceiling is. We know where he can get to when he's really into it and focused. But it's about those kind of week-to-week matches, So hopefully he's not only committed to Spurs kind of longer term, but hopefully we get to see the best Romero more regularly as well.
George, first of all, is there anything else that you'd like to add about Romero? But also, he wasn't the only player to sign a new contract this week. There was also Jed Spence signing his second contract in 10 months, but one that you presume will reflect his raised status amongst within the Tottenham squad. I mean, the one he signed in October, he hadn't really broken through. He'd just been kept around, and that was a turnaround in itself because we thought last summer he'd be off. But it was after that contract in October where he really kicked on and was the rare ray of light during that very dark winter with all the bad results, where he played really well, most notably against Thomas Frank's Brentford in February. And he's now signed a new deal. He started, obviously, the season with a doggy being injured, started at left back, where most of us, I think, feel his best performances have actually been. And his challenge now is to become a regular. It's going to be difficult, I suppose, to dislodge either Udogie or Porro. I mean, there's so many games, and with Udogie's injury history, I'm sure he'll get plenty of matches, but he has the talent to be able to stake a claim in that sense, and that may lead to a chance for England at some point.
Yeah, I thought he actually had a really good chance for England back in March time. Thomas Tuchel's first squad, but he didn't get the pick. No, that is good news for Jed Spence, obviously, and it doesn't sound like it's an extension in terms of any the contract length, but obviously a reward for a very, very strong kind of 2025 so far. I guess kind of, looking at Jed Spence's deal and also Cristian Romero's deal, and look, as much as I'm very downbeat about Spurs missing out on Eberechi Eze, keeping Cristian Romero is massive. And Spurs do deserve credit for that because they've clearly laid out a plan to Cristian Romero that says we do want to be ambitious, we do want to be challenging, because I don't think he would have stuck around otherwise. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the start of Pochettino's reign when you had a new manager come in, signed lots of good players, and then I did go back, my knowledge isn't this good, but 2016, Pochettino signed a new deal, and then it was followed the following kind of autumn and winter by Eriksen signed a new deal, Eric Dyer, Dele Alli, Harry Kane signed a new deal the following year. And it just kind of, you needed one person to be the start, and then after that, all the key figures followed. And I'd like to think that this, Romero committing his future to Tottenham, we believe Rodrigo Bentancur is not going to be far behind him. And you've got a couple of other guys, who are going to be out of contract 2028, Dejan Kulusevski, Pedro Porro, I think, as well. You'd like to think now that those guys have seen Romero commit, they will stay around, and then it just keeps a core. And that is what, Spurs do have a really good core. As much as I feel this squad needs more high quality additions, they do have a really good core group of players. And I've said before, the first 11 to 14 is very strong. It just needs, real quality added to it. So this is big news. And Tom mentioned about kind of Romero's personality and how he kind of flits between different groups. I think actually when Sonny left the club, Romero's post was quite poignant actually about him talking about how you've kind of taught me how special this club is, and what it means to be captain. And I definitely think Spurs have Sonny to thank for Cristian Romero sticking around, because he's clearly seen, how important it is, through Sonny's eyes. And I think also, Ange Postecoglou deserves, a slice of credit here, because don't forget 2 years ago when he come in, Romero was talking about the divide between the players and Antonio Conte and his coaching staff. And I think we all wondered then, how long is Romero actually going to stick around? And clearly he felt a big affinity and a big connection. And I think he said himself, he felt renewed hope when Ange come in. And Ange winning the trophy, obviously helped by Romero, has shown him that he can have his ambition fulfilled here. Because, this is a guy that's won the World Cup, 2 Copa Americas. He celebrated that Europa League trophy like it was just as much as those 2 competitions. So he actually, clearly wants to take Tottenham to new heights. And I think it is a massive thing that they've got his future committed. And hopefully, even though as disappointing as this kind of period has been, this can be a start, Romero sticking around, that actually the club can go to greater heights again.
That was one of Ange's final comments, wasn't it, in the Brighton presser, how important it was to keep hold of Romero at all costs. And it's proven to be the case, even if Ange isn't still here. Interesting point you make, actually, about other players following or potentially following with contract renewals, like what happened after Poch. I mean, Bentancur, by all accounts, is very close to Romero. It feels like that one's surely going to get done. He's so integral so far. Frank's talked him up. I'd be really surprised if that didn't happen. Obviously, the other players have got a little while longer, but Porro, you just have to watch the games, how much Romero and Porro seem to be close. Obviously, there's a Spanish-speaking element, but every time they make a clearance, there's often like a chest bump between the two of them. They seem really, really pally. Kulusevski's an interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously he's injured, so it's hard to make a call on how he fits into this Frank system until he's up and running, and it might be a long time before he's back at peak Kulusevski. But in the interim period, they've signed another player who seems to have got that right side locked down. Does he fit at number 10? We'll wait to see. He's probably quite a good way of pivoting into the next game, because even though he's not playing Kulusevski, he obviously saves his best matches generally for Man City. Man City away, regardless of last season's result and performance from Tottenham, which in amongst a mad season, I mean, that sort of underlines what a mad season it was, wasn't it, in the league? Because arguably that's the most impressive Premier League result ever. It's got to be up there, winning 4-0 at a team, Pep Guardiola's City, who hadn't lost a game in so long. But regardless of that, City away still remains arguably the toughest fixture in world football. It's got to be up there. Tom, City have been a team in not so much, maybe they don't really look like a team in transition, but they've signed a lot of new players. Obviously, the new boy Reinders is the one on the name on everyone's lips at the moment because of that performance he put in at Wolves. How much of a different challenge is it going to be for Spurs this season compared to the one they experienced on November 23rd last year?
I think it'll be a little bit different. Obviously, City, different side. They've got much more legs now in midfield, which I think was their main aim over the summer. I think Haaland, not a new player, but he looks sharp. I thought in that first game he looked really like he's sort of ready to go, fit on it again. So that's obviously going to be a challenge. I think it's less about City. I think everyone knows what City kind of present at the Etihad. I think it's more about Spurs and how they play this game. I think it'll be really fascinating to see how they go about it. We sort of expect, I think, that they'll deploy the kind of PSG template. But I think I don't think it'll just be a sort of, copy and paste. I think Frank was very clear after that match when we asked him, about how they approached it with the set pieces and things. And he said this was a special operation, really designed. I think he even said specifically, isn't he, designed for PSG or designed for this match. And I think he was referring there perhaps to sort of the long throws and things and the set pieces particularly. There was a real emphasis in that game on that, because I think they thought that PSG were vulnerable. Whether he thinks the same about City with Diaz and things, I'm not sure. But that's not to say that there won't still be an emphasis on set pieces, but I'm not sure it'll be quite as explicit. I think they'll probably go with 3 at the back. I'd be surprised if they don't, because we sort of think if Frank is going to deploy the defensive 3 in the toughest games, well, City away and Liverpool away, in my opinion, are the most kind of defensively testing matches you can have. So we expect, I guess, another 3 at the back, don't we, with Danso, Romero and Van de Ven. And more than anything, it's sort of about just the general approach. We can talk about the system and the formation, but also are Spurs happy to not have the ball, for long spells of this game? Are we going to go back a little bit to sort of the Antonio Conte model in these matches where it's kind of like sit back and hit on the break? Or are we still going to see, Spurs try and dominate the possession and try and have spells at least where they take it to City on the front foot? Because that is what Frank has said. He said, there are some principles which he says, are, don't change match to match. I always think in these matches, particularly against City, sometimes people overestimate what you can do as a team tactically. It's sort of like, well, look, we didn't have the ball for 80% of the game. We must have made that was our tactic to let them have the ball. But sometimes you don't have a choice, right? Like City at home, they do just have a lot of the ball. Even if you want it, it's difficult to get it off them. So we might see a defensive performance from Spurs, because of the circumstances rather than by design. But I think it's a really good test, early on. I think it comes at a good time. If I could cherry pick a time to play City, I would always say in the first 5 to 10 games, because I always think they sort of take a little bit of time to get up and running. Yes, the new signings seem sort of, they look pretty good straight away, but I guess you could make an argument to say it's good to play them before they're all really settled in. And look, these games have been really good ones in the last few years, haven't they? I mean, the 4-0 under Ange, in my opinion, I know the Europa League clearly is there, but was a real high point of his tenure. I thought that was such a sort of like a classic, Ange ball performance, and it was the first game, don't forget, that City sort of lost and went on that spiral after that. But even, the other games, there was the 4-2 game, wasn't there, a couple of years ago, 3-3 as well. They've all been really, really great matches. I wonder if this might be a little bit more cagey, might be a bit more cautious from both teams. But it's going to be another contrast after Burnley. And I think that's a really nice thing at the moment to kind of see the Frank tactical tweaks and changes kind of in full flow, match to match.
Yeah, I mean, Spurs have got a good record, really, haven't they? At City, they've done it in lots of different ways. As you say, the 3-3, obviously the 4-0 with the sort of Ange approach, but Conte won there with the dramatics right at the end with Kane's goal, wasn't it? Right at the end, and obviously the draw in the Champions League, but that got them through with Sonny scoring. I mean, lots of different ways. And Frank also has a pretty good record there. I mean, there was that game just before. Was it just before the Qatar World Cup where Ivan Toney scored twice? I think it was last fixture, and they won 2-1. And City were in full flow at that point. That was really, really impressive. And I do think it'll be a really interesting barometer of where Spurs are at, how Frank's going to adapt between games, because like you say, we're presuming he'll switch to a back three. We're presuming he'll change quite a lot in the way he goes about things. But he said there are principles that he always sticks with, so maybe it won't be as much as we expect. I suppose, George, to sort of round things off, unless you have anything else to add on particularly on how they might approach City, is how much can a good performance and a good result at the Etihad be a mood changer after the grim last 24 hours?
Yeah, results are the key, aren't they? You have a good result and everyone forgets about what happened 3 or 4 days earlier. There's an opportunity here for Spurs, I think. This is City have spent a lot of money this year because they went big in January as well. But there's new partnerships. James Trafford played in goal at Wolves, and I know they won 4-0. And I do think he's a very highly rated goalkeeper. But again, he's potentially going to be making his debut at the Etihad. You got Ray and Aït-Nouri at left back. The midfield pairing is different, as well as Tijani Reinders has started. Him and Nico Gonzalez aren't that familiar with themselves. So Spurs have definitely got. There's going to be openings here, and I guess it's going to be similar to that PSG game. Although Spurs actually sort of had a bit more possession, certainly first half, than I kind of anticipated. And I think that's probably the kind of the outlook they've got to go again. They've got to try and keep the ball. You can't just go to Man City and settle for 15 to 20%. You do need to try and keep the ball. And when they do, they're going to need to show real quality. Kudus, I imagine, will be sort of down the middle, potentially with Richarlison if Solanke's not 100% ready yet. And, when you've got someone like Porro and his delivery and obviously the set pieces again, Spurs are going to have chances. If they can take those chances, they can win at the Etihad again. And, if they then can sign someone in that following week, all of a sudden, Eze will be chip paper and old news. But no, it is a big game for Thomas Frank. But I think it's one he's going to relish. He loves this opportunity. And as you said, Tommy went there a couple of years ago, 1-2-1 with 3-5-2. So let's see if he can do it again.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. I mean, it's just what the Spurs fan base will need right now after the disappointment of Eze. But things can change very quickly. Once again, thanks very much, guys, for all the comments. Please keep them coming in. You know where to follow us on all the socials, and let's see how they get on at the weekend. Thanks for listening, guys. Cheers.